Welcome to Sex Ed with DB. I'm your host, DB. Let's get into it. In 2026, we celebrate body positivity, normalize pleasure, affirm identities, and teach everything and anything about sex ed. But our bodies are also being debated in courtrooms and political conversations more than ever in our modern era. That's why I want to tell you about a podcast I think you'll love, one that feels especially important right now. It's called Repros Fight Back. Right now, reproductive health is facing seismic shifts and can feel confusing, overwhelming, and exhausting. And Repros Fight Back gives clear and easy to understand breakdowns with experts of what's happening to sexual and reproductive health and what it means for real people. It's a space to know whether people can access birth control, what is happening for abortion in your state, whether folks can receive gender-affirming treatment, or safely give birth. Access to this information is vital now more than ever. Check out Repros Fight Back wherever you get your podcasts, because here, comprehensive sex education includes understanding your rights. Hello, and welcome back to Sex Ed with DB. I'm DB, your favorite sex educator and pleasure expert, and I am so excited to bring you this best of episode all about desire. How does desire work? How do hormones play a role? What if you need a little boost to get it going? In this episode, you'll hear clips from 3 different episodes of Sex Ed with DB. My conversation on desire and pleasure with Whitney Miller, my conversation with my mom, Dr. Rebecca Levy-Gant, on using testosterone to boost your libido, and my conversation with Dr. Emily Nagoski on responsive desire. As always, the full episodes will be in the show notes. And of course, remember, there is no such thing as normal. Maybe you need some stimuli to get your desire going, and maybe you feel desire unprompted all the time. Nothing is wrong with you. And however you experience desire or don't experience desire, you are great how you are. And I hope this episode reminds you that you're not alone. Without further ado, here I am with Whitney Miller. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some practical tips that you might share with some clients or folks on TikTok who want to give their partners more pleasure in the bedroom. I know every experience is very different, but what are some things that you kind of encourage these folks to think about and act on depending on the situation?
Absolutely. So I always guiding clients to pay attention to the context that they're creating. Like, how are you making your partner feel as opposed to like trying to get into performance? Because a lot of people want to come to me and they'd be like, what do I do with my mouth? Or what do I do with my tongue? And I'm like, talk. You got to like create an environment before you try to like put your mouth on somebody's genitals, because that's going to make it so much more. The touch is going to be more stimulating if you've already got the mind going. So it's like, yeah, I could like try to do all the things with my tongue, but if I create this like sensual environment with my partner first, then by the time I get down there, I'll barely have to blow on it to get, the desired outcome that I want, as opposed to being like trying to be so vigorous with stimulation. It's so much more effective if you stimulate the mind. So I'm always trying to get them to understand that like the power is in the context that you create, the environment, like the mood lighting, the way you talk to them, the way you talked to them yesterday, the way you talked to them the day before yesterday, because all of those things are there once you try to put your hands on them. They're just going to remember every way you've made them feel before you tried to feel them.
Wow. The idea of like how you talked to them yesterday is so real, and something that you can't really articulate that impacted your current situation until maybe after the fact, or it's a cumulative effect where you're like, okay, we're not really communicating, and yet we're expected to have this explosive experience in the bedroom. Like maybe that could happen for some people, but I would guess for most couples or people even, of course, this is different, right? If you've been dating someone for a while versus you're on your second or third date, like the context, again, it's so unique. But this idea that things out of the bedroom deeply impact, no pun intended, what goes on inside the bedroom is super, super important. And we don't really talk about that enough.
We don't. We think that sex is going to fix like the conflict in relationships. But if there's unresolved conflict, you're going to feel so much space when your skin touches. Like once you get like close enough to your partner, if you've not resolved the conflict, there's a wall between you no matter how much you try to touch each other.
I want to know, from your point of view, let's back the truck up. Like, we went over this in our last episode that we did together about hormones, but for the context of this article, what's important for us to know about testosterone, what it does, how does it do it? What are some, myths that you want to dispel about testosterone? Let's get a baseline education understanding about it before we delve into what people are doing with it.
I think the facts are important. One misconception is that people think that at menopause, suddenly your testosterone level starts to go down, just like your other hormones tend to go down, and that's an untruth. Testosterone is a hormone that in women is made about 50% in the ovaries and 50% in the adrenal glands, which is kind of why there's no sudden drop when the ovaries are not working anymore, because it's made in other places. However, peak testosterone in women actually happens way earlier than people thought. And it's really somewhere in the 30s or so that you peak, and then it starts to go down. Kind of just like the idea of like fertility after 35 and ovarian function is less. So your testosterone starts going down and down and continues to go down. And there's no sudden drop at menopause where it just goes to nothing. It doesn't happen. And then throughout menopause, it's actually pretty stable. So that's very hard for women to suddenly say at age 60, it must be my low testosterone that's causing my lack of interest right now, because it's not. Medically, numbers wise, it's not that. We do know something very recent is that later on, maybe in the late 60s or early 70s, there seems to be a small bump in testosterone that women get, and nobody really knows why. But they also know that suddenly women don't become interested in sex at that age also. So again, another proof that
piece of evidence that it's not all testosterone.
Exactly, that it's not all about like your level equals your desire. I mean, women's desire is a very complicated thing, testosterone being part of it, because the way they started to think, maybe we should give testosterone to women who have low libido or low desire, is that they checked testosterone levels in many different women in many different circumstances. And it seemed to show that women with high natural levels of testosterone seemed to have more interest in sex, more libido, more drive. So they came to the conclusion from those numbers, hey, maybe if we give women testosterone, their drive will go up. But it seems that women with higher levels have better drive, but not to the point where it's a one-to-one, like if I give you testosterone, your drive will be better.
Right.
It's actually a work in progress. Like you have to do the work, like do the survey, ask the questions. If it seems like someone might benefit from testosterone, you start them at a level that is about 1/10 of the level of men's testosterone replacement, which, that brings us to the idea of how are women supposed to get their testosterone, right? If you really want to go with what the evidence shows and what the Menopause Society shows and what testosterone scientists say, it seems that 1/10 of a dose that's made for men would be the dose to bring women's testosterone levels back to a normal reproductive age women's testosterone level. And that seems to go along with better libido. Now, we were mentioning before, so then how do you get it into your body? If you're going to use the evidence and the guidelines, mostly women practitioners are doing prescriptions for male products and then having to explain to women that they use 1/10 of a packet of something, or they use a tenth of a squirt of gel or something like that. It's kind of difficult, but it's doable. The other way is that, compounding pharmacies can make it, but according to many societies, they worry about that, about the purity, about how much are you really getting? Is anybody really watching how much they're putting in those compounds? I mean, me personally, I think if you find a good compounding pharmacy as a physician and you work with them and you trust them, there's a way to get testosterone from there as well. And then the last way is unregulated, like people on the internet.
Med spa.
Yes, med spas and places like this, which have no regulation, no oversight, may or may not test your levels. But I've had women come into my office who have been on these unregulated ways to get their testosterone. And while we're looking for up to maybe a 60 or a 70 to say, okay, we know up to there is safe, I've had people come in with 1,300 level of testosterone, 1,500, 3,000. And, some of them don't really care. As in this article, she did talk to people who, knew that you could get a deepening of the voice, which is irreversible, knew that they could grow hair someplace that they didn't want to. I mean, that's all like a risk-benefit ratio. And the problem is women who want to take testosterone really have to be well informed about what the science shows, what the possible side effects are, and what they can expect from it. Yeah. And then somebody has to follow them closely. They can't just give them testosterone and say, don't come back.
The med spas do. The med spas do. Okay. This is interesting though, because, spoiler alert for the end of the article, right? Like there is one specific woman who did get hair, places she didn't want to. There's another woman who lost her hair on her head because that is something that testosterone can do. And she was asked at the end, your hair, she mentioned my hair grew back. Would I do this again? Absolutely. I would do it again. Right. So it's interesting.
Everybody has a different level of, risk. Acceptance.
And a lot of women in this article, they report having more energy, more focus, less emotional intensity. And there's also, of course, a focus on libido and sexual pleasure. One source said she was having orgasms for the first time in years. Another source said she orgasmed for the first time ever, I believe. Or, basically just saying that their orgasms were infinitely better after they started taking testosterone. Talk to us about the science of like how this happens. Why is greater testosterone potentially linked to better or more orgasms?
That's a big question. The best testosterone scientist that's out there is a woman in Australia, Dr. Susan Davis. She came and spoke at the Menopause Society, and she is the person who has done a lot of the research on mostly postmenopausal women, although I think they're recruiting now for peri and premenopausal women to test how testosterone affects their level of function, their sex drive, their quality of life. And she presented at the Menopause Society all the data that they have. And unfortunately, at the end of her talk, basically, it's like, there's just so much that we don't know that we have to do more studies on it. But basically, they're not really sure if testosterone does one of several things. One is it can affect your brain function, right? Because testosterone is very strongly tied to several of your neurotransmitters, like dopamine, et cetera. And those are your pleasure-seeking neurotransmitters. So if it's connected and your higher testosterone levels might affect dopamine, that may be one way that it can affect sex drive. Also, in the body, testosterone is somewhat converted to estrogen. So there are theories that maybe it's the bump in estrogen that people are getting.
Converted to estrogen.
Right, somewhat converted. Like there's a process called aromatase, aromatization. And not all of it, but some testosterone converts. So maybe it's that, Also, testosterone might affect the estrogen receptors. Like there are products that are topical testosterone that are made for the genital area. And it's usually a mix of things where they use testosterone and Viagra, believe it or not, in a cream form where women apply that. But again, as they presented it at the meeting, the instructions are take this cream, apply it to the genital and clitoral area for 10 minutes and rub it in. see if your interest improves. I mean,
Sure.
take any cream, so there's so much they don't know about exactly whether it's the effect of the medication. And not only that, medications that are designed to improve your quality of life in the studies have a very big placebo effect. Like whether the person knows they're actually using the medication or not, many women who apply something and then are asked, is your quality of life better? Is your sex drive or your sex interest better? Many of them say yes, and they may be on a placebo product, so it's difficult to know. But we also do know that for these women who report things like better energy or lower joint pains and things like that, that's all anecdotal. They say it, and we see it in general practice. I definitely have seen it, but I don't have enough evidence to say, those joint pains you're having, take this testosterone and that will be better. It's just part of an overall feeling of well-being. But again, in order to make it appropriate to prescribe for women in general, you have to have the studies. You don't want to be prescribing things that are potentially harmful when you don't have evidence for what that harm might be.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that I learned in the article that I'm curious to get your take on, speaking of the studies, is that the FDA has approved more than 30 products since the 1950s when it comes to testosterone. And yet to this day, there is no FDA approved testosterone cream, patch, pill, or shot for women, even though their testosterone levels fall far more precipitously than men's as they age, even though we heard you in the beginning of this episode, and we were talking about the fact that there's not as precipitous as a drop as one might think, still higher than men. Can you tell us why, other than sexism, what is going on here? Why is there so many products that are approved for men and not for women?
Well, that's the story of misogyny, but that's for another,
So it is sexism.
episode.
All right, great.
So I can tell you they did get fairly close to approval several years ago with a product that was a testosterone patch for women. They evaluated it, they did the studies, it seemed to provide the desired outcome, which was an increase in sexual desire and libido. And it got all the way to the top tier of the FDA for approval. And they rejected it, saying, we need more studies.
Classic. So it got all the way to the top, then it got denied because we need more studies. How are we supposed to get more studies if we don't get more studies? What are we doing here?
I think that kind of put the kibosh on it. And the fact that there is an available product now in like Australia and the UK and South Africa and New Zealand, much more progressive with their studies and much more interested in, women's libido, I guess. But the United States, I don't think is going to get close now.
Okay, so it is available in other countries at the doses that are seen to be quote unquote safe for people who want to improve their libido, but it's not available in the US. Another thing that I kind of want to talk about here, switching gears, is specific to trans health. I'm curious from your experience of working with trans patients and doing research and being in this field for so long, what do you think that trans people should know about testosterone and specifically trans men? And what's your kind of feeling specifically around like the comparative ease of access that cis women kind of potentially can have with these med spas and other ways of it being in the zeitgeist compared to trans men?
Well, I think looking at where they might get the testosterone from is really important, because in the same way that women accessing testosterone from places that are not really medical professionals giving them doses that may not be the recommended dose, if trans men go on testosterone, which that should be a part of gender affirming care, because that's the only way to create male sexual characteristics, like, as you described, facial hair and more muscle mass, et cetera. So I do think that the things that have to be looked into or evaluated when women go on testosterone, which is they have to check their levels. They have to check their cholesterol. They should check their liver functions and things like that. If the FDA or whoever says women should not have available testosterone because you have to check all these things, then men or trans men who are getting much higher doses of testosterone, supposedly safely in a gender affirming environment, should also have those things checked. So I think it just goes both ways that
what's the problem here?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's been established that there are protocols for how much testosterone trans men should be administered to maintain those desired sexual characteristics or male characteristics, as long as they do it in a safe way.
Let's go back to an older work of yours, once again, legendary, Come As You Are. You broke down your research about the sexual response system, and I'm wondering if you can just briefly go over what this is for our listeners and maybe share how your perspective on desire and pleasure might have evolved and shifted since writing that book.
Yes, Come As You Are was first published in 2015. I published a revision in 2021 based on things that I had learned by talking to lots and lots of people about what was in the book. But one of the core ideas, chapter 2, is the dual control model, which is this is the actual brain mechanism that controls how you respond. And because it's called the dual control model, we know that there's going to be two parts. And the first part is the sexual accelerator, or the gas pedal, which notices all the sex-related stimulation in the environment, everything that you see, hear, smell, touch, or taste. That's all your exteroceptive senses. Everything you think, believe, or imagine in your cognitive brain, and all of your internal body sensations. And anything it notices that it interprets as being related to sex, it sends a boop, turn on signal. Here we are talking about sex, which is just a little tiny bit of sex related stimuli. So you have a tiny little bit of boop, turn on signal happening. At the same time, in parallel, you have brakes that are noticing all the good reasons not to be turned on right now. Again, it's everything, your exteroceptive senses, everything you see, hear, smell, touch, or taste. Everything that you think, believe, or imagine. Insert purity culture and body shame here, right? Trauma history. And all of your internal body sensations that your brain interprets as a potential threat. And it sends the turn off signal. So the process of becoming aroused is this dual process of, yes, turning on the ons, but also turning off those offs. And it turns out when people are struggling with any aspect of sexual response, sometimes it's because there's not enough stimulation to the accelerator, but most of the time it's because there's too much stuff hitting the brakes. And this isn't like, it's a cool, accessible metaphor, but this actually literally is how your brain works.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of like that revision that the revisions that you made from 2015 to 2021, were there any changes with this model or more kind of anecdotes or stories, or
this part stayed the same? This part, this is just like the foundation. It's like if I changed the genitals chapter, like we have a pretty okay idea of like what our genitals are made of. And with the dual control model, we have a pretty good idea of what our sexual brain is made of. These are the basic parts all of us are made of. And for each of us, they're just organized in a slightly different way. And we get to know our brains and our bodies. What changed is the more I got into the research, the more... So by the time I get to the desire chapter, I'm talking about responsive desire and spontaneous desire. Now, spontaneous desire is the sort of like out of the blue, sudden, horny, I would like the sexy times. And so you go to your partner with, I got a sexy times, would you like? And hopefully they simultaneously and to the exact same extent also have the sexy times. And that's 100% a normal way to experience sexual desire, but then there's also responsive desire, where spontaneous desire emerges in anticipation of pleasure. Responsive desire emerges in response to pleasure. Now, in the first version of the book, I said, responsive desire is 100% normal. It is just as legitimate and good and fun and provides as much opportunity for great sex as spontaneous desire. But people want to create spontaneous desire, so here's a bunch of tips for creating spontaneous desire. In the next version, I cut all of that. Fuck spontaneous desire.
And
spontaneous because the couples who sustain strong sexual connections over the long term, they talk about what great sex looks like, optimal sexual experiences. Desire barely scrapes into the top 10 characteristics of optimal sexual experiences. People who have great sex don't talk about desire. They talk about pleasure. They talk about authenticity. They talk about vulnerability and connection. They talk about empathy. So I think when people have creating spontaneous desire as a goal, that's a legitimate goal that you can totally have. And also, you are aiming for something that is not taking you in the direction of extraordinary sex.
That's so fascinating that, like, I mean, I'm sure you have thought about this, but just me kind of hearing you say, like, I'm a researcher and I have this knowledge. And so in this next version, fuck it, we're going to cut this whole part.
I'm just not going to talk about that.
I love it. I think it's so important because by you doing that, you're kind of showing what we shouldn't be concerned about, essentially.
Yeah.
And what we shouldn't be worried about. And I think that's very powerful that you're able to do that and able to say, no, don't worry about that. You know, it doesn't matter if you need to feel, if you're wanting to feel spontaneous desire. That's not what's going to get you in that top 10 of feeling super great about your sex.
Like, cool. Try having sex you fucking love. Try having extraordinarily pleasurable, fun, laughing, erotic, messy, joyful sex. For a year. Focus on creating maximum pleasure.
Welcome to the Afterglow, where we wind things down, reflect on big takeaways, and leave you with one juicy thing to try, think about, or explore before next week. Desire is such a complex topic, and so many things can influence how we feel it, from hormones to stimuli to making sure you feel confident and powerful. There are steps you can take if you want to tap into your desire more. What else would you like to know about desire? Right now is a great time to let us know as we plan season 14. We'd love to know your thoughts. Hit me up at sexedwithdb@gmail.com. Just a reminder, I read every single email I get. Now here is your pleasure practice of the week. Tap into desire for yourself. What does desire look like to you? What gets you in the mood? What external factors might be impacting your desire? Stress, depression, burnout, anything else? Take a moment this week to ask yourself how in touch you'd like to be with your desire. If you want more, I hope the knowledge in this episode helps. Love y'all. Talk to you next week.